What's up guys, it's Omar from Simply Car Things, and today we're going to be delving into 5 issues with the BMW S55 engine. Now this is the motor that's featured in the F80 M3, the F82 BMW M4, and the F87 M2 competition. Before we get into the video, if you guys could go ahead and smash that thumbs up button, as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel down below. I post all kinds of awesome content on Simply Car Things here, and your support is much appreciated. And just as a final disclaimer, these aren't super common issues. As many of you know who I'm sure own these cars, the S55 is actually a very stout and reliable BMW M engine, especially in comparison to motors which have come out of the M factory in the past. Let's get straight into the number one issue that everybody talks about with these cars, the crank hub. Now I have a ton of videos actually already covering the crank hub, including a full install overview video, which I'll actually throw a card to right up here. But in short, this is the crank hub from an S55, and this is actually the crank hub that was on my specific M4. Now what happens is this piece actually sits on the end of the S55's crankshaft, and right here you have your sprocket for the oil pump, and then you also have the sprocket for the timing chain, which is this one right here. Now what happens is both of these sprockets are always supposed to be spinning together in synchronization with one another because they are controlled by the car's camshaft and timing. Very important. I explained this more in the other video, which I linked previously, that I've made on the crank hub. But what happens is with high power, torque, and certain oscillations from the car's crankshaft, what can happen is these sprockets will spin independently of one another. As you can see, they're separate pieces, and what's supposed to be holding them together is a friction disc or a friction washer that's placed in between these two sprockets. And basically, if this spins, well, the motor can go out of time, and most of the time the car's DME is actually really good at basically catching when timing is off, and it'll actually just shut down the motor entirely or put it in like a safe mode. But sometimes in certain worst case scenarios, the motor will continue to run, and then you can have engine damage. So like valves coming into contact with pistons, things like that. So it's not a very common issue, but if you are getting your car tuned, if you're planning on running E85, probably making anything north of 500 plus horsepower to the wheels, I'd strongly suggest to get the crank hub upgraded, because it is definitely a prevalent issue. If your car is stock, it's not really something to be worried about, in my honest opinion. Next up, getting into our second issue with the S55 engine is going to have to be weak plastic charge pipes. Now with the S55, we know that it shares a lot of that architecture with the N55 engine, and sure enough, the N55 also has weak charge pipes from the factory, or a weak single charge pipe from the factory. But the S55 actually has 2 plastic charge pipes, which, as you can see in this image, actually sit right above the valve cover. There's actually a little space where the engine cover kind of wraps around the charge pipes. And in the M cars as well, they are also plastic. And while they are not as prone to failing by design in comparison to something like the N55 engine, they've still definitely been known to fail. So upgrading your charge pipes, it's very simple, it's very inexpensive, the installation is so easy. I have a full DIY, which I'll throw right up here as well on how to do that, because going with a set of aftermarket aluminum charge pipes is going to help you greatly, especially if you tune the car, or even just for longevity and durability. A lot of times with heat cycling and with how hot these engines can get, that plastic over time will start to deform, it can expand, and it basically, all that stress on the material can essentially make it prone to cracking over time. It's also very prone for the stock rubber couplers and clamps to actually pop off as well. So that's another thing. These cheap couplers that they use and little like hoses are just not adequate, especially if you're running higher power, or if you're gonna mod the car. Third on the list is gonna have to be oil leaks from the valve cover and oil filter housing gasket area. Now, it's not a very prevalent issue again, and that's particularly because these cars are still relatively new and they haven't exactly aged quite a bit yet. I mean, we're starting to see these F8X cars get into the higher mileage range, like past 70, 80K miles. But even then, that's really not a whole lot where you're gonna see oil usually leaking from those areas. However, I definitely believe that this is something that is going to occur, especially as these cars age, as the gaskets deteriorate, and as we see them get into higher mileage. Now, the oil filter housing assembly is pretty much identical to what's on the N55, and we know that the N55 is also prone to having oil filter housing leaks as well. So There really isn't a whole lot that says that the S55 won't have it, although it doesn't seem to be as common as what you see on the N55. And again, with the valve cover gasket, I definitely believe that'll be something that comes up at the higher mileage with these cars. Now the oil pan gasket, usually I would include that as well, but I don't believe that's going to be really much of an issue even in the long run for these cars, because the oil pan gasket is actually sealed off with a metal ring essentially. Now while the gasket is still made of that conventional rubber material, there's actually like a metal plate that will seal the S55 oil pan to the block itself. And this is evident in the crank hub video that I did, which I filmed the entire process for. When the oil pan was removed and we put the new gasket on, the OEM gasket actually uses a like metal liner essentially, which I think is really going to help with that durability and preventing leaks in the future. Now fourth on our list of S55 issues is going to come in with an air to water intercooler internal cracks. Now again, this is not a highly common issue, and I genuinely believe that is because the age of these cars hasn't exactly gotten to that level where these issues may start presenting themselves in a more common fashion. Again, if you take a look at this image, you can see that next to the charge pipes we have this little metal box thing, and what this is a air to water intercooler that sits on top of the engine. Basically it has its own dedicated liquid cooling system to reduce and maintain engine temperatures overall. So it actually has two expansion tanks. You have your main engine coolant expansion tank, and then you also have your charge coolant expansion tank, which sits right up top. Now over time, some people have actually found that these intercoolers can actually crack on the inside. And basically what happens is there will be a very minor internal coolant leak in a very catastrophic event, and I don't think it's ever happened to anybody, at least in a recorded instance. What can happen though is coolant can actually get into the engine via that internal crack of the intercooler. So again, it's not a very apparent or common issue that this can occur with, but it has been noted by multiple people, and I know a few shop owners that have actually had to replace customers' air-to-liquid intercoolers because of that exact reason. So most people will just go with like an upgrade. CSF is a good company. I think VRSF also makes one. And there's a few other companies that make those top mounted intercoolers, but it's definitely something to be aware of just in the event that your car is beginning to age or get to higher mileage. Again, these things on the inside can be known to crack. Now our fifth and final issue that's going to come with the S55 is injector failure. And by no means is injector failure a common or even widespread issue with the S55 platform. The injectors are very stout and they're actually very, very strong for a car of this nature. However, if you do plan on tuning these cars, if you do plan on particularly running E85, injector failure is definitely something that has been apparent. Not to say that the type of fuel that you're running in the car is going to cause the injectors to fail themselves. I'm not saying that E85 is the cause of that. However, it's the aggressive tuning that's associated with running E85 on your car that can cause your injectors to fail. Sometimes the injectors can just get clogged and they're not feeding fuel right into the combustion chamber properly, or the injector can get stuck open, or you'll just have misfires, or the injector just completely goes dead for whatever reason, and you will need to get an injector replacement. So generally speaking, you'll see this issue manifest itself in the form of a cylinder misfire. There's so many different scenarios where this may occur. However, like I stated, it's mainly with users that run E85 or very aggressive tunes. On the stock or even mild tune system, these cars really don't experience that. And again, you can always replace the injectors as well. With all that being said, that is going to cover it for 5 issues that the BMW S55 can actually have. Now, I figured I'd group these into one list because I just feel like they're the most noteworthy to mention or talk about, especially because a lot of you guys that watch these videos want to buy this car with the intention of modifying it or tuning it or whatever the case may be, tracking it, just driving hard. So in that case, it's definitely important to be aware of these potential problems that can occur or can arise. However, you can definitely bulletproof these cars with some basic aftermarket upgrades. And even then, out the box, these cars are very, very strong. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you could smash that thumbs up button as well as subscribe to the channel down below if you haven't done so. Of course, your guys' support is always appreciated. I can't wait to make more videos for you guys, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Take it easy, everyone.